Tomba is a little-known jewel of a video game saga that dates back to the two first generations of the PlayStation Entertainment System, consisting of semi-3D platformers, where you fulfill quests and conquer the wildlife to free a vibrant world from a lineage of evil wizard pigs. We sure are not the first ones to mark this game as a forgotten classic. Beyond the unique way in which you move around this world and deal with diverse enemies by managing a wide assortment of weapons and gear, what makes the Tomba games shine is, without a shadow of a doubt, the care that is put into its world building. There is no need for fancy, complicated plots. What the developers want to give you is not some grand unilateral narration, but instead a literal living space, where the player can build his own official route through jumping between the plethora of available activities, and bask in the glory of a great visual and musical level design that has this liminal quality, this ability to find the back door to your memory. Such a gameplay philosophy reminds us of the way in which Felix Guattari sought to lead with the crisis of the epistemology offered as a synthesis of the previous psychological tradition by Lacanian psychoanalysis. The fragmentary game design could be described as rhizomatic, instead of a traditional arborescence, a building-up structure typical of genres with linear plots, matchmaking, roguelike run systems, or Metroidvania key-based progression. Whilst the clear priority of environment over narration resembles the shift from systematic philosophies to what Guattari called ethico-aesthetical paradigms, complex conjunctions of style choices that carry implicit moral transfiguration of the perceived. And this line of thought, we suddenly hit a goldmine. Just like the work of any psychoanalyst, the plot of the Tomba series, or more specifically the second installment in the saga, is in itself a work of archetypal anthropology. Through its fantasy world, it manages to present key symbols that suffice in building a mirror on which to see ourselves in a strange way, uncovering truths about our behavior that are so naturalized we can't even perceive them on a day-to-day basis. Accompany us through this journey to find the secret hiding behind the adventures of our favorite redhead warrior. There sure is no better place to start than the protagonist himself. In the Tomba series, we play as Tombi, one of the remarkably few human males in the whole world, but he surely dresses and behaves differently to the rest of humans. Most men in the island are wary of nature, and most of his interactions with it involve employing them as tools for a sedentary life. As Thomas Nail argues in The Philosophy of Movement, such a static way of life would denote, for classical politics like that of Aristotle, a sign of civilization. In contrast, Tomba is aestheticized as somewhat barbaric, but ultimately an adventurer or traveler. Other than the underdeveloped fisherman village he calls home, he swears not loyalty to any place, identity, symbols, religion, group, or creed. In this sense, the developers want us to identify its non-verbal psychology with that of the peoples at the quote-unquote wrong side of the walls of Western cultural canon, being adaptable into notions of tribal freeriders, like those that partake in walkabouts in the Australian Aboriginal territories. But far from implying negative qualities, in this uncivilized way of being, Tombi precisely lies as a hero, a noble savage that, as Rousseau would have depicted, exists previous to the moral failings instilled in oneself through private property and civilization. His dissociation with any single one of the fragmented cultural communities in the island precisely makes him the one that brings the island together, and bridges the gap between their limited perspectives, that by themselves are clearly unable to penetrate into the land's secret or defeat the scourge of the evil pigs. In Tombi, we can find the archetype of the messenger god, a key figure of Apollonian nature that was especially relevant to classical Greek culture, as testified by the examples of Hermes and of Socrates' daemon. The savage condition of Tombi is further refined by two key plot elements: his companions and the taboo state. Tombi's all-time friend is precisely the closest non-human relative to mankind, the ape, and a reflection of a perturbed mind that Tombi can reflect in opposition to and be reconciled with. As for his best companion, we find the dog, man's best friend since the era of tribalism. But above all else, Sippo stands out as Tombi's soul brother. At first, Sippo's insect nature could signal us towards a character in the style of Pinocchio's talking cricket. But Sippo never lectures or imposes anything to Tombi. The relationship between them is precisely the opposite. Sippo is Tombi's voice in this world in dire need of dialogue and service. For this reason, it seems more likely that Sippo is a mask in the Freudian sense. As a good savage, Tombi is not just previous to the corruption of civilization, but also that of individual reason, which divides and annihilates the vibrant living nature of the world through its inevitable act of distinction and analysis, both necessary conditions for social participation through language. Thus, Sippo is there to bring out characteristics that are not in Tombi's conscience, to be able to better perform in the limit-breaking task that is communication for a self-sufficient savage. Behind the mask, be it a literal piece of clothing, war paint like the one the children in Lord of the Flies use, or even an external, spiritual interlocutor that is the voice of your conscience and reads your mind, just like Sippo, the tribesmen are able to express that which their conscience forbids by absolving them of having to perform as themselves, adopting the often libidinal, extreme, and transgressive persona of the mask. A similar limit-breaking function is achieved by the all-too-rare taboo state, wherein the temporal suspension of repression allows Tombi to experience what Huxley would perhaps call an opening of the doors of perception, wherein the first potential for protagonist is brought to the world in all its magnitude. Where is all this leading to? Tombi's virtue, and our virtue as well, were we to accept the necessary return to the primitive past, goes beyond mere geographical or genealogical positioning, as he is also consistently presented as a kind, honest, and loyal character, a character that thus is considered good in itself. As said, Tombi has a special relation with animals and foes,
Get the fuck out of here.
whereas the rest of islanders manage them as resources, standing by and waiting for dilapidation, use, or consumption, akin the Gestell that Heidegger termed to characterize the technological life of annihilated societies, wherein resources are standing reserve. Tombi bears with the natural world with whom he is strongly identified, and he bears a more integrating relationship, where each being is treated as an end in itself, and allowed to deploy its particular inner capabilities on its own terms, through a slow, almost mystical process of observation and development through time, that Heidegger would term poiesis. The poietic relationship Tombi has with the natural world likewise reflects in both his combat style and his cordial, helpful nature towards all the innocent beings of the island, standing as their governor or protector in the shadow. In Eastern political philosophy, this kind of éminence grise, of government without domination, is an ideal of the ruler that is precisely described in the same way that Tombi defeats enemies, standing above or standing over the governed, with their consent and for their own good, but almost without their awareness. Such a conception can be found all throughout the Tao Te Ching, and also in a well-known Confucian analect, which goes like this. A gentleman's virtue is the wind, and the common man's virtue is the grass. When the wind blows, the grass bends. Tombi is, in fact, the archetype of the Taoist good life. Especially in his silent nature, he is the living embodiment of the Tao when understood as a flow or wu wei. Such is the essence of a hero that, even if disguised beneath Western cliches, is radically inside a revolutionary retelling of Campbell's monomyth, where the pursuit is not the character's proof of worth or self-improvement, but his simple, harmonized existence, correcting the outer flow of the world by mere action. Tombi's key learning in this heroic journey is not a breakthrough in his own individuation, or the coming to terms with either a reality or a moral duty, to be exhibited as self-evident through example and experience, as in standard Western myth, but instead it is the providing of an already perfect and full being, the human being with phronesis, that is to say, with the practice, the tools, and the ethical know-how to actually turn the good intentions and clear mind already within one into actionable pursuits that make that good objective and real in the world. Such a view is strengthened by the fact that classical virtues like courage are not within lessons to be learned by Tombi, but rather they are weapons, instruments of correction, to be found and connected with the player, serving not only as extensions of Tombi's Taoistic force, as led by the emptiness or metaphysical Tao that is the player arbitrary's free agency over the virtual playground, but also as self-developing others, with hidden poetic utilities within themselves, just like the hammer of the artisan in Heidegger's theory of techniques. How come this be? Surely, a lady might stand at the goalpost and obscure this narrative of narrative self-sufficiency. But let's pay attention to what stands between them, the evil pigs. After all, the archetype of the dragon, the otherworldly force to be reckoned with at the main midway obstacle in a hero's journey, is just as important as the archetype of the damsel in distress, the female encoded promise of pleasure that serves as an ulterior, superior goal of promise with which to motivate an originally incomplete hero to withstand discomfort in the name of a conception of good or truth he has not yet acquainted himself with completely. So, evil pigs. In Japanese culture, pigs and boar have a special role. Their symbolism has changed throughout time. In the more medieval stages of the archipelago's history, boar were looked upon as the most fearful of common game, and so with boar came a positive connotation of determination, but also the negative characterization as an impetuous creature that wreaks havoc, trapped as it is in obstinance of self-absorbedness. However, as industrialization crept in during the Meiji period and animal husbandry reoriented to fit the needs of large consumer markets, pigs became a symbol of prosperity, more specifically material wealth. These aesthetic keys are a thing of the past, but modern Japanese culture does not seem to simply reject them, but instead repurpose and mix them. Thus, we see in many works of Japanese art after World War II the use of pigs as some sort of symbolism for humans. Mixing the two historical beings, they are understood as beings that are simultaneously of industrial, refined taste and of a primal immaturity, thus fitting perfectly with the depictions of humanity made by ecological, non-anthropocentric, or even pessimistic anthropologies that make sense in a Shintoist and Buddhist culture like Japan's. Furthermore, there is even a tendency to depict the men turning into pigs as a result of their moral corruption, their delving into the animalistic or filthy aspects of their nature. In other words, in keeping with the respectful avoidance of Orientalism we have so far defended, we can give to the evil pigs no other symbolic charge than that of profoundly corrupted humans. Put against the Tao embodied in Tombi, these villains appear intuitively as creatures who have gotten too absorbed in flow-denying ambitions that disrespect their own selves, such as pride and intellectualism in the evil ice pig, or gluttony and health in the evil earth pig. In a more specific way, the evil pigs seem to be all trapped by what Francis Bacon called the idolaphory, the idols of the forum. These are logical fallacies wherein, due to the misuse of vocabulary tasked with carrying meaning, two contradictory concepts are confused into a single stance or outlook, resulting in the emptiness of meaning of a statement. A clear example of this is the evil ghost pig. He is, as a ghost that remains within our world, disturbed by an affair left unresolved, and thus disconnected with the flow in its hauntological state. But what perturbs him is not his death, or the spectral state itself, but the mistake he makes when judging how others judge him. For you see, running contrary to Machiavelli's well-known dilemma, the evil ghost pig has lost the ability to differentiate between provoking fear unto others and garnering their respect. When Tombi, unstartled by him not necessarily out of a great bravery that withstands fear, unlike the Western romantic heroes, but rather out of a primordial, pure innocence befitting of a good savage that could remind us of, for example, the escaped Native American in Brave New World, In the face of that, the evil ghost pig takes a questioning of his ability to instill fear as a denial of the respect he properly deserves as a deceased ancestor. To reinforce and knock together all this discourse of pigs and men, a key point remains worth mentioning: the way in which these egotistical, human-like pigs wreak havoc upon a land that is ecologically integrated, that is to say, a land where fauna, flora, and a plethora of sentient species already feed into each other's subsistence and live in harmony. The way in which to wreak havoc is precisely the way in which needy, self-centered humans have put us where we are now. They use a perversion of the forces of nature, much like industry, magic, which happens to be imbued in look-alike robes that symbolize both ecclesial or judicial authority of reason and spirit over nature, and the depersonalized, performative nature of social roles and functions, whose interchangeability lies at the foundations of any semblance of quote-unquote civilization. And with it, they precisely mobilize nature against nature, not only disrupting the Tao, but feeding tendencies of climate injustice that lead to massive environmental and physiological changes in the whole of the island. Tombi must correct them to restore the Gaia, the world ecology, as an entity to be said of much greater importance than a mere princess, and through it, free the Tao from a limiting self-sabotage. Given all the spiritual contents of such an anthropological reading as the one here were displayed, it is no surprise then that precisely over all other things, the final evil pig has control of time. As per the title Sign and Sight, in this work by the aforementioned German philosopher Martin Heidegger, who Seika proved sufficiently in his video about Studio Ghibli to be closely connected to Shintoism, the main object of study is the way in which time as a transcendental sight affects being as an immanent poiesis, sign. Heidegger concludes that without time, being would be without content, analogous to the static nature of a hypothetical world before the Tao as a founding principle of emptiness and change. The existence of being is then no other than its being towards something. In the case of human beings, we speak inevitably of being towards death, or Dasein in German. Well, what is the last evil pig but Dasein itself? But a memento mori for the always young and lively Tombi. He is precisely the most deadly of all pigs, because when time is stopped, the poiesis that fills the good beings in the island are deprived of existence and even of essence, represented through color, which, as we can remind, is a key aspect of the game's ecology and villain design. Only evil Gestalt, represented by the enemies and machines, can keep on functioning beyond the intervention of poiesis as a moving vitality. But even that form of existence is perturbed, as testified by the eerie music. And with all the stage set, Tombi is found at the end of time, with nothing but a mission. He shall defeat the oppressive reminder of the inevitability of death, not by learning to live in denial of it, as per Ernest Becker's suggestion, but in a Heideggerian and Taoist way. The only way to overcome death is to literally stand above it, and make it part of what you are, making it your possession by slotting it into your bag, which just so happens to look like the purses of the pigmen who started this ecological catastrophe to begin with, out of a silent hope of cheating nature and possessing it, instead of accepting that they too shall become nothing but mere objects to them. When dust they become, and dust they remain. And this has been all for today's episode. I hope you have enjoyed today's video. If so, we recommend you leave a like, maybe a comment, and subscribe by hitting the bell if you would like to see more videos like this. I am David, and this has been A Futile Conquest.